So let's talk about the psychology behind motivation. So we're going to talk about psychological needs. And the first one that we're going to start talking about is self-determination theory. It basically states that there are three basic needs which are driven to satisfy. So the first one's autonomy, and that is what we talked about before, and that's your self-determination. The second is competency, and that's your capability and effectiveness. The third one is affiliation, and that is relatedness and belonging. The emotional control part of the self-determination theory is quite simple. It's that we can use our emotions as feedback. So positive feedback would be praise for your emotions. You can use gratitude exercises to help you with your emotional control. Finding the emotion behind why someone is or isn't motivated is actually really good, and to be able to talk about it is something that we should be focusing on. I find that you are, very scared or you're very sad. Let's talk about that and let's dive into that, because then we're going to dive into how to get to the goal. We're going to find that motivation within that emotion. And then there is a rebound effect that we do see, that if someone is suppressing their thoughts or emotions, it actually comes back to, and this is like one of those things that you hear all the time, it comes back to bite them. But it's true. If you're suppressing your thoughts or your emotions, you tend to then dwell on it, and it keeps coming back, and it keeps coming back more and more often and more strongly. So if someone is, not really talking about their emotions and they're keeping it all inside, that bottling up effect is really going to explode at one point in time. And we really don't want to see that happen. So being encouraging with your peers and saying, we should talk about your emotions, we should talk about how you're feeling while we're doing this goal, might help them to come around to the idea of talking about their emotions. So some other psychological needs. The first one is attentional focus regulation strategy. So this one's a lot like reframing of your thinking. So you intervene on your own emotional responses in order to increase your motivation. So you are talking about your emotions in a good way, and you are acknowledging the negative and the positives of that emotion, but you're catching it before you let the emotion become an act. And then you reframe your thinking to look at other aspects of the situation, and you look at the silver lining or the positives. There is a theory within this theory that if we change the contents of our thinking, we can change our motivational state. So we'll go over reframing of thinking a little bit more in tips and strategies, but this one's a really interesting one to look at as far as psychological needs go. The other thing that we need to look at is how we sustain motivation. So in order to sustain our motivation, we need the following: reminders, repetition, and rituals. So reminders of where we've come, how far we've come, what goal we have tried, where all of our successes, barriers, who's helped us, all of our support. We need those reminders because we tend to only focus on the negative aspects of our lives. It's just something that working memory does for us, but we can be those reminders for those individuals that we're supporting. So we can say, hey, we've come so far. Let me remind you of everything that you've done, or let me remind you of all the successes that we've had, or all the barriers that you've gotten over. So we can help out with those reminder parts. The next is repetition, and this is key for anyone. This repetition is doing something over and over and over again until it becomes, lo and behold, a ritual. So repetition is just trying things over and over and over again, and sometimes there are failures in those repetitions, but as long as you get back up and you keep going, you are on your way to then becoming closer to that goal, and then creating that ritual, which is practicing and doing whatever they are doing, an act, precisely over and over again. So an example of this for sustaining motivation, we could use weight loss. So Maybe I want to lose 5 pounds and I would need to give myself reminders. Okay, I need to go to the gym and maybe I do some reminders about how far I've come. So maybe I do like a beginning photo and then I have reminders about, what my nutrition should look like and making sure I'm writing everything down that I'm eating. And then my repetition. So I go to the gym, but I don't just go once a week, I go a couple times a week, right? And I keep doing the same stuff over and over again each week in order to get to the goal. And then the ritual is continuing that. So maybe I've lost the 5 pounds, but I continue to go to the gym to maintain it. So that's really talking about sustaining your motivation. So let's get into the fun part, strategies and tips. So we're going to be focusing on a lot of strategies and tips. Don't get overwhelmed, don't get overbogged, maybe take some notes, but these may or may not work, and it really depends on the person you're supporting as well as yourself. But these are just used as things that you could bring into your peer support sessions. So the first one we're going to start talking about is motivational interviewing. I love motivational interviewing. I think it's really fascinating, but I'm also a very curious person, so I always want to know why and how. So the motivational interviewing is asking open-ended questions about the goal, and that could give you a better idea of what motivates that person. So some examples of questions that you could ask would be, what is the greatest lesson you've learned from your parents? Who is your childhood hero? Who have you not talked to in the past 6 months and have you reached out? And what gets you out of the bed in the morning? Now, these aren't specific to peer support goals, but this might give you an overview of who that person is. So let's use myself as an example when I answer these questions. What is the greatest lesson you've learned from your parents? I think mine would be consistency and saying that, regardless of what happened the day before or what's going to happen in the future, I need to show up and I need to be reliable for other people as well as reliable to myself. And that is getting out of bed in the morning and making sure I have maybe my routine and that I have a plan for each day going forward and knowing that, whether or not I fail, I can get back up the next day and do something different. So that's just an example of like an answer you might get. And that might give you a little bit of an overview of, you already know that my parents are consistent in my life, that they've taught me that I should be reliable, and they're probably reliable with me. And then you also learn that I have a routine and that I look at things in a different way, maybe with that silver lining. So that gives you an overview of not just the goal, but who that person is. Another strategy and tip is communication. And I think we use this with a lot of stuff. Communication is really key, and you'll hear that a lot out of my mouth, but it's true. I mean, being good active listeners and being good communicators is really part of our job as peer support specialists. So why not use that to our advantage? So being redundant as communicators is really good. Repetition, like I said, with motivation is needed. So you want to keep reminding and using that repetition in order to keep that motivation going. Using praise and compliments when the peer does well. And this is really, really important because this is something that we don't do for ourselves. So if I'm working on a goal and someone says, wow, you're doing a really good job, I tend to not believe them at first because I'm like, really, am I? Because we're so conditioned as human beings to say, you're not doing enough or you're not doing as much as you need to, but people are recognizing that you are doing well. So as peer support specialists, we want to give them the praise and the compliments, and we want to keep them going. We want to use that positive reinforcement. We also want to clearly define what we're working on and give them choices. So sometimes individuals are not real sure where to go next, or they're not sure where to start. Remember going back to being overwhelmed as one of the lack of motivation or engagements. So we as peer support specialists can clearly define, we have the plans right in front of us. We're there for the IRP. We know what goes into their contact notes, so we can say, why don't we start working on this goal and let's organize it. Let's break it down into littler goals and start working on some of the activities. Here are some of your options and here's some of your choices. And then within communication, we have the process principle. So find small wins and keep reflecting on them. And that really goes back to that positive reinforcement. Reflect on how far the person has come, and then keep bringing up the wins over and over again with that repetition. So reminders and repetition over and over and over again. And it might sound like a broken record, and you might be like, wow, I just keep saying the same things over and over again, but you don't even understand how much that person's going to need that in order to stay motivated and engaged. Oh, you're right. We have come a far way. We have been doing a lot with that goal. Okay, let's keep going. So there is a saying that says that persistent people spend twice as long thinking about their accomplishments. So that was really interesting to me that in order to keep going, you have to keep looking at what you've already done and how far you've come. So it just shows that communication can sound very simple to the normal person, but as a peer specialist, communication is actually quite complicated for us. You know, we really want to be, again, those good communicators and those active listeners for our peers. Emotions is the next one we're going to talk about. So emotions can be a big barrier when it comes to motivation and engagement. So in order to help our peers, here's some of the tips and strategies. We want to help our peer with balancing their emotions. We want to focus on the feeling. So why do you want to change? And then use the emotions that you've talked about to drive that goal. So an example, and I always use weight loss because it's one of the easier ones to kind of quantify and look at, is, you know, maybe that person's really unhappy, not only physically, but mentally. And so they tell you, I'm really unhappy with myself and I get really down on myself. See, that is the feelings. Those are the things that they are feeling about themselves. So that is their driving point. You know, you want to change because you're not happy where you're at. So you want to use those emotions and those feelings to drive the goal. Okay, well, when we start to see progress, you're going to be happier with yourself. You know, you're going to start to really, you know, value who you are. And it doesn't matter if you lose weight, you don't have to, but you're telling me that losing weight would make you happier. So let's drive that goal. Let's keep going. You want to take time in each session to discuss how the peer is feeling about the goal. So regardless of how they are feeling at the beginning of the goal, we want to keep going and reevaluating that. So maybe once a week say, okay, how are you feeling about losing weight? You know, how are you feeling about going to the gym 3 days a week? What are your feelings on that? And then really process that. So discuss that dissatisfactions if they have any and help them come up with solutions if needed. Maybe they're really unhappy about going 3 times a week and you find out it's because their schedule's too busy. So maybe you're going to sit down and say, okay, where can we fit it in? Or do we need to figure out a different method? You know, maybe you go 2 times, but you go a little bit longer those 2 times. So really sitting down with them and problem solving the emotion and issues with what they're feeling. You could also come up with a gratitude list or a small win list, and that shows the peer that not everything's a failure. So again, going back to they don't want to go to the gym 3 times a week, you know, maybe they feel like they don't have time. Maybe you could bring up in the past when they have gone 3 times a week, what else was going on in their lives and see, you know, has anything changed? You know, do we need to change that goal? Anything like that. You want to challenge your peer to discuss their emotions. And that is for everything. You know, you want to talk about their emotions, how they're feeling, checking in, making sure that they're still with you. And you want to talk about the negative and the positive. You know, not everything is going to be sunshine and rainbows. It's not all going to be positive. We're going to be talking about some negative emotions. Now, when you talk about the negative emotions, you need to have a very clear definition with your peer. Is this just a venting? Like you're very upset and you just want to get it out? Or do you want a solution? And then that way you can tell just by them telling you this is a venting session or this needs a solution, where you're going to fit as a peer support specialist. Are you just going to be listening today, or are you going to be coming up with some solutions with them and helping them problem solve? And lastly, you want to tell your peers you believe in them. And that seems super simple, but I think that people get so wrapped up in their work and, getting from one appointment to another and getting the goal achieved that we forget that we are supposed to be the one saying, hey, you've got this and I've got your back. And that they should believe in themselves too. So really reinforcing that. You should be so proud of yourself, and here's why. So next we're going to talk about Envision. People have a hard time envisioning change. Even when I think about myself, going back in my history, I used to smoke cigarettes, and I remember thinking, I could never not be a smoker. I cannot even imagine what that would look like. I would always tell my friends, well, what would I do when I feel stressed out? Or what am I going to do with my hands when I'm driving? And now reflecting back on it, I think, well, that was really silly of me. I've figured out that I can put my hand back on the steering wheel, or when I'm stressed out, I've put other coping skills in place. But we don't envision the change. So when we don't envision the change, we have a hard time with motivation. We don't want to actually work on the goal because we don't see it as a possibility. So we want to discuss the reason for the goal and let the peers envision what the change would look like. So associate the emotions after the change. Talking about weight loss, you're going to be happy with that weight loss because that's the goal that you wanted to work on. And then talk about the possibilities of the change happening. Like with the weight loss, you're going to be able to buckle your seatbelt easier. You're going to be able to tie your shoes a little bit easier. So really breaking down that envisionment and giving them small examples and keep repeating it. We also can do what are called stretch goals. So stretch goals are goals that are not in the close future, but this would be really good. So let's say again for weight loss, right now they just want to lose 5 pounds. You can use the stretch goal as like a stepping stone. Okay, after you lose 5 pounds, imagine what you can do next. You're going to be able to maybe run around the block. You're going to be able to lift 5 pounds. You're going to, and keep going with those stretch goals and saying, look how far you've come and look how much farther you can get to. And then I think it's really cool to use like vision boards or pictures or, collages in order for someone to envision it in a different way. So a vision board is creating a board with pictures of what the change or goal would look like. So maybe you could sit down with your peer and cut out pictures from magazines or print them off from the internet of maybe some weights or some exercises they want to do. Or even like the coolest part, I use Pinterest for everything. I'm obsessed with Pinterest. But you could get them onto maybe like a Pinterest page and they could start pinning exercises they want to try, or start pinning outfits they want to wear when they hit their goal, or start pinning activities they want to try. There's all types of things you can find on Pinterest. So using that so that the peer can keep, like I said, envisioning that change. So networking is our next strategy and tips. And honestly, working as a peer support specialist, we know how important it is to have a good network of people around you when you are changing, when you're working on things, and really just in general to support you. So we want to help the peer identify people who are already motivating around them. So maybe they have a network of people they already use, and then we can maybe put down how they motivate them. Maybe mom is super great with reminders, and maybe dad is like super awesome at saying, look how far you've come. We want to know those things so that we can teach the peer to keep relying on that network in the future. Then we want to help the peer foster these good relationships, making sure that they're still communicating in a good way, reaching out when they need to, understanding the boundaries. We want to encourage the peer to empower and encourage others. So think about ourselves as peer support specialists. We get a really good motivating and engagement from helping others. I always hear from certified peer specialists, I had a peer that achieved a goal and I couldn't have been more proud. It was like myself achieving that goal. And it's so true. So when we have individuals that can encourage other people, it really encourages them to work on their goals as well. We want to help create a network of people who share the same motivation. So maybe looking at groups they can join, whether that's online or in person, drop-in centers or support groups, or even something as simple as a Facebook group and where they can check in or there's some accountability. So again, I always use weight loss, so just bear with me. But maybe they could join a Facebook group that they post recipes for nutritional, good recipes, or maybe they join a Facebook group that has exercises and people post what exercises they're doing that day. Having some of that accountability as well as some of that motivation. And then maybe they can get encouragement from individuals in those groups. So people are engaged and motivated by why we do things rather than what we do. So it's not even the posting of, I got 10,000 steps today. It's the why are you doing that? Well, I really want to be healthier. That's what people celebrate. It's not really what you do, but the background behind it. And then help the peer with balance. Help them balance their relationships, scheduling, and appointments. So that is another thing that we run into when it comes to motivation is I just don't have time. Sometimes you don't, and then sometimes it seems like you don't. So maybe as peer support specialists, we can sit down with them and say, I hear you saying you don't have enough time to have a network, but I see that like from 8 to 9 every night, you're kind of just scrolling through Facebook. So wouldn't it be really cool if you had a group that you checked into during that 8 to 9 and you were doing something productive, and saying, and encouraging others and encouraging yourself. So really coming up with some of that problem solving with them. The next one are interests. So bringing in things that the peer enjoys or captivates them. An example would be your peer really likes Star Wars. You could bring them examples from the movies or series into the sessions about smart choices, self-esteem, etc. We had an individual who was super into Star Wars and he seemed to not be able to focus too well because he was so infatuated with telling Star Wars stories and telling his CPS all about, his figurines and what he's been into. And the CPS was struggling, and I said, well, use it to your advantage. So we came up with a plan, and that CPS took out coloring pages that were Star Wars that the peer and the CPS started to talk about. The peer started to color, and then the peer was kind of hitting his need with that interest. So he started talking about his goals, and he started talking about anger, and he started talking and working on what he needed to, while also fitting in the Star Wars references. You also want to have activities focusing on the goal with some fun parts bringing in that interest. Discussing good relationships while throwing a football, keeping them engaged while you're doing the goal is really helpful, and they kind of then look forward to you coming to work on that goal because it's not just let's sit down on the couch, stare at each other, and say a few things about the goal. This is actually getting them involved and getting them active and being able to say, we're really engaging in the moment. Including individuals in the session that might help engage. So maybe their mom's like super good at getting them engaged in activities, or dad's super motivational. You would want to offer that. Do you want them to come into the session and kind of help us with engagement? Do you want to see what their ideas are? You could use the informal supports as supports for yourself as well. And I think it's a really cool idea to say, okay, mom, we're kind of hitting a wall. So when you hit a wall, what usually helps? Or maybe bringing their wife or husband in. Hey, we're really not sure what else to do. What are your thoughts? And making sure that the peer is okay with this, of course, and making sure we have a release of information. It might be a good way to get that peer to be more excited and be like, yeah, let's bring them in. Let's see what they say. Maybe they can help with some of this stuff. And it builds the relationship. And then be creative. Think outside the box in order to get excitement and engagement. Maybe your individual can't read or write, so maybe you start creating pictures, or you start using visual aids, or you use YouTube videos for instructions. There's all types of things that you can do, and honestly, Google is your friend. Google it. If you're not sure, Google it. Ask Google, and I'm sure you'll find some articles or some interesting videos that would help you with that. Some general tips. Be flexible. If you need to switch gears, do so. And that sounds simple, but it's really hard. And especially when we're so used to doing things a certain way, and then we have a peer that wants to do things a different way, we kind of panic, like, oh no, what do I do? Be flexible, go with it, see what happens. I mean, as long as you're adhering to, regulations and policies and procedures, try it out. And if you're not sure, you should reach out. Model behavior. If you're ready for the session to be motivating and exciting, your peer is more likely to follow suit. And if you ever sit in any of my trainings, you hear that I do talk about the experiment with the interviewing and good modeling of behavior. And it just basically is, as human beings, we tend to model whoever is across from us. So if we're going into the peer support sessions really excited and being like, we got this, we can do this, most likely your peer is going to then model that same motivation. And if you can envision the peer doing well, you want to voice that, and you, again, repetition, you want to voice it a lot. You've got this. I know you do. Look how far we've come. Those type of statements are going to get you farther with that peer. Reflection is really, really key too. You want to keep reflecting maybe weekly, maybe every 2 weeks on how far you've come, what you've already worked on, how awesome the peer is doing, and the improvements that you've seen and the barriers that you've overcome. You really want to highlight those things, but you want your peer to start doing that for themselves. So eventually you're going to get to a point where you start asking the peer to reflect and to tell you what their successes were, what their barriers that they overcame were, and that's teaching them in the future to be independent in reflection. Maybe use fun challenges or make it a game. One article talked about making it a game to unlock achievements. So the article that I'm talking about is, and you can see it in resources, it was really cool. It was actually how to engage employees. But it had like this one where the entire office got together and they decided that they were, in order to hit their goals, they needed to make it a competition. So 2 or 3 of the employees got together and made little achievement badges that they would put on the back of their chairs, and then they made little trophies. So every milestone that they hit, someone would get a trophy. But it kept the whole office engaged in the activity because it was something that everyone got together and really came together as a team and made it their own. But you could do that with your peers in a more simple way. You could have achievement badges for every small goal that they hit until they hit the big one, and then maybe, they celebrate, or you guys have a celebration, or, maybe they go out for a coffee that day. Have something for them to look forward to and to work towards in order to get to that goal. Again, just more motivation. And then just have fun, get creative. You can have fun in your sessions too. You don't have to be going out and being dry. Some people don't respond well with that. You want to be fun, engaging, and empowering to those peers because you are a motivator, you're a supporter. And you should be doing this in your own life too, so that you feel empowered. Use these strategies for yourself.